Imagine boarding a plane, exhausted and 7 months pregnant, only to be told you don't belong in the seat you've paid for. Because of the color of your skin, what started as a routine flight quickly turned into a nightmare of blatant discrimination. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, a federal judge appeared, and everything changed. But would courage be enough to overcome cruelty at 30,000 feet? Stay with me, because what happens next will shock you, and it's a story you won't forget. Zara gripped her boarding pass, her heart racing as she stepped onto the plane. She was 7 months pregnant, exhausted from a long day, and all she wanted was a moment of peace in first class. But the moment she approached her seat, Karen, the flight attendant, blocked her way, her tone sharp and cold. "You can't sit here," Karen snapped, as if Zara's condition meant nothing. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the murmurs of other passengers fading into a tense silence. Zara's mind raced. She knew she had every right to this seat, yet here she was, ignored, dismissed, treated like she didn't matter. Every second stretched painfully as Karen refused to budge, her eyes hard, unmoving. Then, a whisper of authority entered the cabin. A voice that carried weight, respect, and power. A federal judge was on the plane. The air shifted. Suddenly, Karen froze, her smug confidence crumbling in the face of someone who could hold her accountable. But would this mysterious figure intervene? Could Zara finally claim the dignity she deserved? Or was this confrontation about to spiral out of control? What happened next would shock everyone on that flight and change Zara's life forever. Zara Lewis had always been the kind of person who carried warmth in her smile, even on the roughest days. At 32, she balanced a demanding career in marketing with the quiet joys of her home life. Her apartment, nestled in the heart of the city, was filled with soft sunlight in the mornings, the scent of coffee brewing, and the gentle hum of jazz drifting from her speakers. She was 7 months pregnant, and every evening she would sit by the window, resting her hand on her growing belly, imagining the life she and her unborn child would share. Friends often described Zara as resilient, kind, and fiercely independent. Her pregnancy had been a dream she and her husband had waited years for, and she was determined to protect every moment of it from stress, worry, or negativity. She had traveled for work before, navigated busy airports, and even flown alone when necessary, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for what was about to happen. In her mind, today was simple. A short business trip turned mini vacation before maternity leave. She had saved, planned, and even upgraded to first class, a small reward for months of hard work and late nights. She imagined reclining in her seat, letting the flight attendants cater to her needs, taking comfort in the extra space, the privacy, the dignity. It was a small luxury, but to Zara, it symbolized respect. And yet, as she approached the gate, a subtle tension had already started to ripple through the air. The clerk's polite smile felt forced. The glance she received from a nearby passenger lingered too long, as if judging her place, her presence, her right to belong. Zara shook it off, attributing it to pre-flight jitters. She wasn't naive. She knew the world didn't always treat women, let alone black women, the way they deserved. But she also believed that simple humanity and courtesy could carry her through. Still, beneath the excitement of travel and the comfort of first-class expectations, a quiet unease began to gnaw at her. A fleeting look from a flight attendant, a brisk tone in someone's voice, a subtle hesitation that she almost didn't notice, small, almost invisible signs of the prejudice that could lie just beneath the surface. And though Zara couldn't see it yet, this flight would soon become a test of dignity, courage, and the courage to confront injustice in a world that often looked the other way. The moment Zara stepped onto the plane, a sense of calm she had clung to for weeks began to unravel. She adjusted her bag, smiled at the nearby passengers, and walked confidently toward first class. But Karen, the flight attendant, was waiting. Not with the usual friendly greeting, not with the warmth Zara had expected, only a sharp, assessing stare. "Ma'am, you can't sit here," Karen said, her voice clipped, her tone laced with authority. It wasn't a question, it was a wall. Zara blinked, startled. "Excuse me?" Karen didn't soften. "This is first class. "You're not assigned here." "I am," Zara replied, holding up her boarding pass. "Seat 2A." Karen's eyes flickered to the paper, then back to Zara, and a smirk crossed her lips as if she found amusement in Zara's insistence. Other passengers were beginning to notice. A few glanced toward Zara with sympathetic eyes, while others looked away, uncomfortable, uncertain. Zara felt the first sting of frustration, not from fatigue, not from the long day she'd endured, but from the realization that her rights, her dignity, were being challenged for reasons she didn't even need to guess. She straightened her back, summoning courage she had never needed before. "I'm pregnant," she said calmly. "I have every right to sit here." "Please let me through." Karen laughed, soft, cruel, dismissive. "Pregnant? That doesn't change the rules." The cabin's tension thickened. Murmurs grew. Some passengers whispered, unsure if they should intervene. Others simply watched, glued to the unfolding drama like a train wreck. Zara's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the baby move, tiny, frantic kicks echoing her own anxiety. Every heartbeat screamed that she shouldn't have to fight for something so basic. Karen didn't move. Instead, she waved another attendant over, whispering something Zara couldn't hear. The pair exchanged a glance, then Karen stepped closer, blocking the aisle. "You'll have to wait," she said, her voice almost taunting. Zara's mind raced. The cabin felt smaller, air tighter. How had something so simple, sitting in her assigned seat, become a battle for respect? She glanced around. Other passengers were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked sympathetic, others nervous, but no one stepped forward. And for the first time, Zara realized just how isolating public prejudice could feel. It wasn't only the action of one person, it was the silence of everyone else. Desperation and determination collided inside her. She tried again, her voice steadier this time. "I'm asking you professionally, respectfully, please honor my seat." Karen's smile widened, sharper now. "Professional? Respectful? You don't get to tell me how this works." Then came the subtle, unmistakable weight of systemic disregard. A male passenger nearby, noticing the tension, shrugged and muttered, "Maybe just let her sit. Why make a fuss?" But his words didn't carry authority. They were invisible against the wall of Karen's control. Zara felt her stomach tighten, not just from anger, but from the suffocating realization that no one in authority was yet willing to intervene. And then, just when hope seemed a faint flicker, a voice rang out across the cabin, steady and commanding. "Ma'am, step aside." Every eye turned. Zara froze, heart leaping. Karen's posture stiffened. The sound of footsteps approached, confident, deliberate. It was Judge Olivia, a federal judge known for integrity, sitting quietly in first class, now standing with the authority to enforce fairness. Karen's smirk faltered. Her hands trembled slightly. The once solid wall of power she had wielded so easily was cracking. "Step aside," Karen repeated, disbelief in her tone. "Yes," Judge Olivia said, calm but unyielding. "Let her sit, now." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Zara's pulse raced. But Karen didn't move immediately. Instead, she froze, eyes darting, searching for a loophole, a justification, a reason not to obey. And in that instant, a silent, suspenseful moment, Zara realized the fight wasn't over. What Karen would do next would decide everything. Dignity regained, or humiliation deepened. The cabin felt electric, every passenger tense. Every gaze locked on the confrontation unfolding just steps from the first-class seats. Zara's chest heaved, not from exhaustion, but from the storm of emotions raging inside her. Fear, frustration, and indignation collided in a way that made it hard to breathe. She had never imagined that something as simple as sitting in her assigned seat could ignite such a battle. Karen stood rigid, arms crossed, a wall of authority built on entitlement and prejudice. But now that wall was cracking. Judge Olivia's presence alone shifted the air, her calm, unyielding authority cutting through the cabin like a sharp knife. The judge's eyes, focused on Karen, demanded accountability without a single word yet spoken. Zara swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. "I'm not asking. I'm telling. This is my seat." Her voice wavered only slightly, but it carried a quiet steel, a determination honed from years of having to assert her worth in a world that often dismissed her. Karen's lips tightened. "You think you can tell me what to do?" Her tone was sharp, defensive, trembling on the edge of panic. The murmurs of passengers rose, whispers of disbelief and anticipation echoing through the cabin. Judge Olivia stepped forward, her presence commanding. "Ma'am, I said step aside, now." Time seemed to slow. Karen's eyes flickered nervously, darting toward other attendants as if searching for allies. A few nodded hesitantly, but none moved decisively. The tide was turning, but the battle hadn't ended. Zara's hand instinctively went to her stomach, feeling the baby's kick. It was as if the child inside her recognized the danger and the courage needed to face it. Her heart pounded. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to exist without harassment or judgment. Then, in one sharp motion, Karen stepped forward, her hand raised as if to block Zara entirely. "You're making a scene. I will not—" But Judge Olivia interrupted, her voice low but lethal. "Enough, step back." Karen froze. For a fleeting moment, it seemed she might refuse. The tension was so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. Zara's mind raced. What if Karen defied a federal judge in the middle of a plane? What if the humiliation and prejudice escalated further? Every scenario played out like a nightmare, and yet Zara stood her ground. Then something shifted. Karen's jaw clenched, her composure cracking, the facade of control slipping. A flash of recognition, fear, flickered across her face. The murmurs of passengers swelled, a collective energy pressing on her like gravity. And in that suspended, harrowing moment, Karen finally took a step back. The silence that followed was deafening. Zara's breath caught. Could it really be over? Could she finally reclaim the space that had been denied to her simply because of who she was? Her fingers brushed the armrest of her rightful seat. Relief surged, but it was tempered with vigilance. She knew prejudice didn't disappear just because someone stepped aside. Judge Olivia's eyes met Zara's. A nod, small but heavy with meaning, communicated that this wasn't just about a seat. It was about standing tall, asserting humanity, refusing to accept humiliation as the norm. Karen muttered something under her breath, bitter and resentful, before retreating down the aisle. Some passengers applauded quietly, others just exhaled, as if releasing weeks of held tension. But Zara's heart was still racing. She lowered herself into the seat, feeling the first real sense of space, dignity, and safety she had experienced since boarding. Yet even as she settled, a flicker of unease remained. Karen's resentment was palpable, and the injustice she had faced didn't vanish with one confrontation. The plane continued its ascent, engines roaring, but in Zara's mind, something heavier had lifted. The knowledge that courage, persistence, and standing up for oneself could tip the scales, even against blatant prejudice. And then, as the flight attendants busied themselves with routine announcements, Zara caught Karen's eye from across the cabin. A silent tension lingered, a reminder that the battle for respect and equality wasn't over. Not on this plane, not in the world outside it. Zara exhaled, a mixture of relief and defiance coursing through her. The seat was hers, the fight was hers, and yet the story wasn't finished, because the true challenge wasn't claiming a seat. It was living in a world that would keep testing her every single day. With a quiet, determined breath, Zara whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." Echoes of the confrontation still hummed in her mind. The tension that had gripped her chest for so long began to ebb, replaced by a slow, simmering sense of empowerment. She had faced blatant discrimination in front of dozens of strangers and refused to back down. For 7 months pregnant, for herself, for her unborn child, she had stood her ground. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Courage could tip the scales, even in a world that often seemed stacked against you. Judge Olivia remained seated nearby, her expression calm but approving. In a subtle gesture of acknowledgement, she nodded to Zara. It was more than a nod. It was a signal that justice, even in small personal forms, could be claimed. Passengers who had watched the confrontation with bated breath began to murmur among themselves, some offering Zara quiet congratulations, others shaking their heads in disbelief at Karen's audacity. It was clear that the act of witnessing someone stand up to injustice had resonated deeply with many on the plane. Zara leaned back, finally allowing herself to breathe fully, to feel the tiny kicks of her baby as if the child was celebrating alongside her. For the first time in what felt like hours, she allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't just about reclaiming a seat in first class. It was about reclaiming her dignity in a society that too often dismissed Black women's worth. She realized that small victories mattered because they built the foundation for broader change. Meanwhile, Karen retreated to the back of the plane, her composure visibly shaken. The defiance that had seemed so unshakable earlier had crumbled under the weight of accountability and moral authority. Passengers watched, some exchanging sympathetic glances toward Zara, others with silent relief that the confrontation had ended without further escalation. Karen's colleagues whispered among themselves, uncomfortable, aware that her behavior would not go unnoticed. It was a subtle but clear signal that systemic injustice could be challenged, that those who abuse power, even in small, everyday scenarios, could be confronted. The rest of the flight passed without incident, but the echoes of the confrontation lingered. Zara reflected on how easily prejudice can become normalized, how silence can empower injustice, and how public confrontation, though exhausting and frightening, can become a catalyst for change. She knew that the lessons of this flight would stay with her forever. That courage in the face of discrimination isn't just about standing up for oneself. It's about challenging the silent acceptance of bias that allows it to persist. By the time the plane began its descent, Zara felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that this incident would likely fade in the public's memory, perhaps even minimized by those who did not witness it firsthand. But for her, it marked a turning point. She had faced systemic prejudice head-on and refused to be diminished. More importantly, she had done it while pregnant, carrying new life inside her, a powerful symbol of resilience and hope. Judge Olivia's quiet presence remained a reminder of the importance of allies, of authority figures who use their power to protect the vulnerable, rather than enforce hierarchy. Zara realized that change rarely comes from waiting silently. It comes from the courage to act, the willingness to assert one's rights, and the refusal to let hatred or prejudice go unchallenged. The moral of her experience was stark. Racism doesn't just harm individuals. It erodes the trust, safety, and cohesion of entire communities. By standing up, she hadn't just defended her seat. She had defended dignity, respect, and justice itself. Weeks after the flight, Zara found herself reflecting on the long-term impact of the encounter. News of the incident spread quietly through social media and local news outlets. Karen's actions became the subject of internal investigations by the airline. Policies were revisited. Training programs on unconscious bias and customer respect were implemented. For Zara, this wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, awareness, and creating an environment where future travelers, especially pregnant women and people of color, could feel safe and respected. The personal lessons were equally powerful. Zara realized that courage was contagious. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had witnessed or heard of her story began speaking up more confidently in their own lives. Acts of subtle discrimination, once tolerated in silence, were being challenged. Communities that had often turned a blind eye to injustice were learning, slowly, that unity and support could be transformative. Prejudice, when confronted, loses its power, but only when individuals have the bravery to act. As she cradled her baby in the weeks that followed, Zara often thought back to the flight. The memory wasn't painful anymore, it was empowering. She had faced hatred, dismissal, and systemic bias, yet emerged stronger, more self-assured, and more determined to protect her child from a world that sometimes fails to see their worth. The confrontation had been a microcosm of a much larger struggle, one that countless families experience daily. And she had proven, in her own small but significant way, that courage and dignity could prevail. In the end, Zara's story became more than just a personal victory. It became a lesson for every passenger, every bystander, and every individual who faces prejudice in silence. Racism destroys families, prejudice weakens communities, and unity brings healing. The fight against discrimination is never easy, But every act of courage, every refusal to accept injustice, chips away at the foundations of hate. Zara understood this deeply now. Sitting in her first-class seat, surrounded by passengers who had witnessed her ordeal, she realized the profound truth of her experience. Courage defeats hate. And sometimes it starts with the simplest act, refusing to give up the seat that is rightfully yours. As she looked out the plane window, watching the city lights twinkle below, Zara whispered softly to herself, "This is just the beginning." Every time we stand, every time we speak, we change the world, one act of courage at a time.